The forest was quiet that evening, except for the occasional rustle of leaves in the cold wind. The sun had begun its slow descent behind the tall pines, casting long shadows that danced across the forest floor. Samuel, a cowboy who had lived alone in a small wooden cabin for years, sat on the porch, whittling a piece of oak with his knife. The cabin was simple. Just a single room with a fireplace, a bed, and a small table, but it had kept him safe through many harsh winters. He liked the silence, the freedom, the way the wind carried stories through the trees. He had been alone for a long time, and he liked it that way. People were complicated. They brought noise, arguments, and expectations he didn't want. Animals, on the other hand, were honest. The deer that grazed near the creek didn't lie. The fox that darted between the trees didn't hide its intentions. Samuel trusted the forest. That evening, though, something felt different. A shadow moved between the trees. At first, he thought it was an animal, maybe a deer, but then he saw a figure, a woman. Her movements were careful, quiet, and cautious. She wore simple clothes, worn from travel, and her hair was dark and braided neatly down her back. There was a nervousness in her steps, but also a quiet strength. Samuel set down his knife and watched. His hand rested on the old rifle leaning against the porch railing, but he didn't raise it. The woman stopped a few feet from the cabin, bowing her head slightly. Her voice, soft and respectful, carried through the cool air. "Can I stay at your cabin until they leave?" she asked. Samuel blinked. He wasn't used to visitors, let alone strangers asking for shelter. He opened his mouth, unsure what to say. His mind ran through the possibilities. This could be trouble, or it could be someone in real danger. He studied her face. There was fear there, but also dignity. She didn't beg. She didn't demand. She simply asked, "Who? Who are they?" Samuel asked cautiously. She looked up, her eyes meeting his for the first time. "Settlers," she said quietly. "People from the towns nearby? They are angry. I need to hide." "Just for a while," Samuel frowned. The word settlers carried weight. There had been conflicts in the area before, fights over land and water, misunderstandings that turned into violence. Samuel had seen some of it, from a distance. He had avoided getting involved. But now, faced with this woman, he felt a twinge of responsibility. He leaned back in his chair, studying her. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Finally, he said, "You can come in, but only until they leave. Then you'll have to go." A small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. She nodded, bowing her head again. "Thank you," she whispered. She stepped closer, careful not to startle him. Samuel noticed the small bundle she carried, a blanket, a few simple belongings wrapped in cloth. He made space by the fireplace, where a few logs burned with a soft orange glow. The woman, whose name was Ayanna, moved quietly inside, her eyes taking in the cabin. Everything was simple, plain, and clean. Samuel had made it that way deliberately. Too many belongings would have made him feel crowded, and he liked being able to see everything in one glance. Ayanna sat by the fire, unwrapping her bundle. Inside were a few personal items, some herbs, a small carved wooden figure, and a leather pouch that smelled faintly of dried flowers. She didn't speak much at first, and Samuel didn't either. Silence settled over the cabin, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a quiet understanding that words were not always necessary. After a while, Samuel broke the silence. "You've traveled far," he said. Ayanna nodded. "Yes, many days. I had to leave quickly. They would not understand if I stayed longer." Her voice wavered slightly, but she didn't cry. Samuel noticed the determination in her eyes, the way she held herself upright despite exhaustion. "Where are you from?" he asked. "I live near the river, east of here," she said. "But now it is not safe. People do not trust us. They do not see us as neighbors, only as different." Samuel nodded slowly. He understood that feeling, though his own differences were of a different kind. People looked at him and saw a quiet man who preferred solitude. Ayanna's difference was in her culture, her heritage, her way of living. The world was not kind to those who were different, and yet here she was, asking him for help. Then you'll stay, he said finally. For as long as you need. Just be careful. Don't let anyone know you're here? Ayana's eyes brightened. Thank you, she said softly, bowing her head again. It was a gesture of respect, not submission. And Samuel felt a strange warmth in his chest. Night fell, and the forest grew darker. Samuel stoked the fire, and Ayana moved to the corner of the cabin, where a small stack of blankets lay. They ate a simple meal cornbread, some dried meat, and water from his jug. Samuel watched her eat quietly, noticing the way she handled the food with care, as if every bite mattered. Do you live alone here? Ayana asked between bites. Samuel nodded. Years. It's quiet. Safe. Mostly. Ayana looked around, studying the simple room. It is peaceful, she said. I like that. Sometimes people forget how to be quiet, how to listen to the world. Samuel smiled faintly. The world is loud enough. Sometimes you have to find your own quiet. They didn't talk much after that. Samuel went outside to check the horses, making sure they were fed and safe. Ayana sat by the fire, humming softly, a song she had learned from her mother long ago. The melody was gentle, almost hypnotic, and Samuel found himself pausing in the doorway, listening. For the first time in years, Samuel felt the presence of another human being, not as an intrusion, but as a companion. It was strange and unfamiliar, and yet it felt right. As the night deepened, the wind outside picked up, rattling the cabin's shutters. Samuel lay on his bedroll, thinking about the woman who had appeared in his life so suddenly. He didn't know what the coming days would bring, whether the settlers would come closer or whether they would remain hidden. But for now, he felt a quiet resolve he would protect her, at least until it was safe again. In the corner of the cabin, Ayana closed her eyes, trying to rest. Her mind was full of worry for her family, for her people, for the uncertain future. Yet, for the first time in many nights, she felt a small measure of safety. The cabin was not much, but it was enough. Outside, the forest whispered its secrets. The fire crackled, and the stars shone through the tall pines. Two strangers, bound by circumstance and trust, shared a moment of peace in a world that had grown dangerous and uncertain. Neither knew what tomorrow would bring. But in that quiet cabin, in that simple act of kindness, a connection was born of fragile, tentative, human connection that would shape both of their lives in ways they could not yet imagine. The days passed slowly in the quiet cabin. The forest outside shifted with the season's morning fog rolled between the pines, and birds sang softly as sunlight touched the earth. Inside, Samuel and Ayana began to settle into a rhythm, though it was cautious at first. Samuel had always lived alone. He knew the patterns of the forest, the behavior of animals, and the sound of wind across the hills. Yet living with another person, even one as quiet and respectful as Ayana, required patience he had not practiced in years. Ayana, for her part, was careful not to intrude. She kept her movements quiet, spoke softly, and respected Samuel's routines. She helped with chores, sweeping the cabin, fetching water from the nearby stream, gathering firewood, but never in a way that seemed demanding or rushed. Samuel noticed, silently appreciating her presence, but struggling to admit it. You missed a spot here, Samuel said one morning. Pointing to the corner of the cabin where dust had collected, Ayana glanced at it and smiled faintly. I will clean it, she said. She knelt down and worked carefully, her movements precise. Samuel watched for a moment, feeling a strange sense of relief. It was as if the cabin itself had softened under her touch. They began to talk in small ways. Around the fire in the evenings, Ayana would tell stories of her home near the river, of the seasons, the animals, and the traditions of her people. Samuel listened, sometimes asking questions, sometimes simply nodding. In turn, he spoke of the forest, of the trails he had mapped over the years, and of the animals that had become his companions. You know the river well? Samuel asked one evening, poking the fire with a stick. Ayana nodded. Since I was small, I learned from my mother. She knew all the plants, all the animals. The river gave us food, water, and stories. It taught us to live with the land, not against it. Samuel listened, imagining the flowing water, the trees bending in the wind, and the quiet rhythm of life by the river. He realized that he had been living similarly, though in his own way alone, observing, surviving, respecting the land. Over the next few days, Samuel taught Ayanna some of the skills he had learned. He showed her how to keep the fire going through the night, how to track small animals, and how to repair clothes and tools. She absorbed the lessons quickly, asking questions when she didn't understand. But always with patience and humility. "You have sharp eyes," Samuel said one morning, as they walked along the forest edge, checking traps. "You notice things most people miss," Ayanna smiled. "I had to. Where I come from, missing small things can be dangerous." There was a quiet trust growing between them, subtle but powerful. Samuel found himself thinking less about his solitude and more about her well-being. He noticed when she was tired, when she worried, and even when she smiled, which she did rarely but warmly. One day, while gathering herbs near the creek, Ayanna stopped suddenly, her hand on Samuel's arm. "Listen," she whispered. Samuel held still. The sound of footsteps approached from the forest edge, not deer, not wind. Human voices, low and angry, carried through the trees. He could hear them talking, though not clearly enough to understand all the words. "They are close," Ayanna said quietly, fear flickering in her eyes. Samuel's heart quickened. He had known this could happen. Living so close to settlements meant danger could appear at any time. "We'll stay hidden," he said calmly. He guided her to a small hollow under a cluster of fallen trees, where they could crouch and watch without being seen. The voices drew nearer, their steps heavy. Samuel's hands itched for his rifle, but he stayed still. He had no desire for conflict, only to keep both of them safe. The men passed by, unaware of the two figures crouched in the shadows. The tension slowly eased. "Thank you," Ayanna whispered once they were safe. "You saved me again." Samuel shook his head. "We saved each other. You're careful, too. That matters." After that day, Samuel realized that the outside world was not as distant as he had hoped. The settlers were nearby, and any mistake could reveal Ayanna's presence. Yet he also realized something else. They had created a small world of safety within the cabin, where trust and care existed without fear. As the days continued, they developed routines together. Samuel would wake early, feed the horses, and check the traps. Ayanna would gather firewood, tend to the small garden they had planted, and prepare simple meals. They shared evenings by the fire, sometimes in silence, sometimes in conversation. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Samuel asked, "Do you miss your home?" Ayanna nodded. "Every day. But home. Home is more than a place. It is the people, the memories, the land itself. I carry it with me, even here." Samuel considered this. He, too, had once had a home not like this cabin, not surrounded by trees and river, but a place of people, laughter, and family. He had chosen solitude after losing those connections, believing it safer to be alone. Now, he wondered if he had been missing something essential. Winter approached slowly. The nights grew colder, and frost began to appear on the cabin roof. Samuel showed Ayanna how to keep the fire burning longer, how to insulate windows with cloth, and how to prepare food that would last. Ayanna, in turn, showed him how to make herbal teas that eased the chill and helped them sleep better. One cold evening, as snowflakes began to drift gently outside, Samuel noticed Ayanna's gaze lingering on the forest. "Do you ever fear them finding you?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "Always, but fear is not a chain. It is a guide. It teaches me to move carefully, to observe, to survive." Samuel admired her calm bravery. He had faced danger in the past, wild animals, storms, rough terrain, but the fear she carried was different. It was a weight of history, of people who judged others before knowing them. And yet she bore it with dignity. Days turned into weeks, and their coexistence strengthened. They shared small moments of joy, a rabbit caught in a trap, a sunset reflected on the creek, the first snowfall covering the forest in white. Samuel found himself smiling more, speaking more, even laughing occasionally. Ayana's presence brought warmth into the cabin that went beyond the fire. One evening, Samuel returned from checking the traps to find Ayana sitting by the fire, her hands busy weaving a small basket. "What is that?" he asked. "A basket," she said simply. "To hold things. To organize. To remember." Samuel watched her work, fascinated by her skill. She moved with precision, each strand of material carefully placed, the pattern forming naturally. He realized that she had brought more than her presence into the cabin. She had brought knowledge, creativity, and a gentle order that complemented his rugged solitude. Yet, despite the peace they had created, tension always lingered. The outside world was unpredictable. Samuel knew that the settlers could return at any moment, and Ayana knew her family could be in danger. They had built a fragile sanctuary, but it existed in a larger world that was often unkind. One morning, as they worked near the creek, Samuel noticed fresh footprints in the mud, human footprints, larger than theirs, moving toward the cabin. He exchanged a glance with Ayana, and she nodded slightly. "They are coming," she said softly, her voice steady despite the fear. Samuel felt a surge of protectiveness. He had lived alone for years, and he had never imagined risking himself for another person. Yet now, for her, he felt ready to face whatever came. They returned to the cabin quickly, barricading the door with heavy logs and ensuring the windows were covered. The forest outside seemed to hold its breath as the footsteps drew nearer. Samuel and Ayana crouched near the fire, hearts pounding, listening to voices in the distance. The settlers moved past the cabin once more, unaware of the hidden pair inside. Samuel exhaled slowly, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. He realized that the forest was no longer just his sanctuary, it was theirs, together, and its safety depended on their trust in each other. That night, as the fire burned low, Ayana turned to Samuel. "Thank you for keeping me safe," she said. He shook his head, looking into the flickering flames. "No, we keep each other safe. You are strong, smart, careful. I could not do this alone." They sat together in silence, the quiet crackle of the fire filling the room. Outside, the forest stretched endlessly, full of shadows and secrets, but inside, a fragile sense of home had formed. It was not perfect, and it was not permanent, but it was theirs. As Samuel watched Ayana drift into sleep, he understood something new. Life could be unpredictable, dangerous, and lonely, but it could also offer connection, trust, and care. In the heart of the forest, two strangers had found a shared sanctuary, a place where respect and understanding bridged the gap between different worlds. And though the outside world remained uncertain, for now, they had each other, and that was enough. Winter had fully settled over the forest. Snow blanketed the ground in white, covering footprints and softening the sounds of the world. The cold air bit at exposed skin, and the creek near Samuel's cabin had begun to freeze at the edges. Inside, the cabin was warm, the fire crackling and sending waves of heat through the small room. Samuel and Ayana had grown accustomed to the rhythm of their day's work. Meals, stories, and quiet moments by the fire. Yet both knew the peace could not last forever. Ayana's family was still out there, somewhere, waiting for her return. The settlers who had threatened her were gone for now, but the forest held no guarantees. Samuel understood that it would soon be time for her to leave. The thought brought a strange weight to his chest. He had grown used to her presence, her calm strength, and the subtle warmth she brought to the cabin. One morning, after breakfast, Ayana sat by the fire, carefully packing a small bundle of her belongings. Samuel watched silently, not wanting to interrupt. He felt a tug of sadness, but also pride. She was brave, and she knew when it was time to move on. "Are you ready?" Samuel asked softly. Ayana looked up, meeting his gaze. "I think so," she replied. Her voice was calm, steady, but Samuel could see the hesitation behind her eyes. "I must go back. My people, my family, they need me." Samuel nodded, understanding completely. "I know. You have a life beyond this cabin, and I'll miss you." Ayana smiled faintly, bowing her head slightly in her quiet, respectful way. "And I will miss you," she said. "You gave me safety when I had none. You showed me trust, even when the world did not." They stepped outside together. The snow crunched beneath their boots as they walked toward the edge of the forest. Samuel had helped Ayanna gather supplies for her journey: dried meat, herbs, and a small bundle of blankets to keep her warm. She adjusted the pack on her back, the weight not heavy compared to the relief she felt from having a safe place to rest. Before she left, Ayanna turned to Samuel. "You must promise me something," she said. "Anything," Samuel replied. "Do not forget that there are people in the world who are kind, even when it seems dangerous to trust them. And do not forget to listen to the land. It will always guide you." Samuel smiled, touched by her words. "I promise." Ayanna started down the trail, her figure gradually disappearing among the snow-covered trees. Samuel watched, feeling a mix of loss and gratitude. He had spent years alone, thinking solitude was the safest choice. Yet her presence had taught him something important: connection, even brief, could transform life in ways solitude never could. In the days that followed, the forest felt quieter, emptier, without Ayanna's soft humming, the rhythm of her hands working, and the warmth she brought to the cabin. Samuel tended to the fire more often, walked along the creek, checking the traps, and watched the forest with a new awareness. Her lessons had left a mark on him. He noticed the subtle signs of wildlife, the small changes in the wind and the patterns of snow on the ground. He had learned to live not only for survival, but also with respect, patience, and care. Weeks passed, and one morning, as Samuel walked along a familiar trail near the creek, he noticed footprints in the snow, light and familiar. His heart leaped. He followed them, careful to stay hidden among the trees. The footprints led him to a small clearing where the sunlight fell softly on the snow. There, gathering herbs near the creek, was Ayanna. "I thought I would see you again," Samuel said quietly, stepping into the clearing. Ayanna turned, her face lighting up with a gentle smile. "I had to make sure my family was safe," she said. "But I wanted to see you one last time before I returned home fully." They spent the morning together in the clearing, talking and laughing softly, enjoying the quiet beauty of the forest. Samuel realized that even brief encounters, even fleeting moments of connection, could hold great meaning. "I will never forget this place," Ayanna said, looking around the cabin and forest. "Or you?" Samuel nodded, feeling the truth of her words. "Nor I." Finally, the time came for Ayanna to leave again. She hugged Samuel, a simple gesture filled with warmth and gratitude. Then she turned and began her journey toward her family, moving steadily through the snow-covered forest. Samuel watched until her figure disappeared among the trees, a mixture of sadness and hope in his chest. Life returned to its quiet rhythm. But Samuel was no longer the same man who had lived alone in the cabin. He continued his work in the forest, checking traps, tending the garden, and caring for the animals, but now he did so with a deeper awareness of connection. He thought often of Ayanna, of her strength, wisdom, and the lessons she had brought with her. One evening, as the sun set behind the pines, Samuel sat on his porch, looking at the stars beginning to appear in the clear winter sky. The forest was silent, yet alive. He felt a sense of peace, knowing that he had offered help when it was needed and received it in return. The world could be harsh, but kindness, trust, understanding could bridge even the widest gaps. Months passed, and spring approached. The snow melted, revealing the green growth beneath. Samuel tended to the garden, planting seeds and mending the cabin after the long winter. The forest was alive again, birds singing and the creek flowing freely. He felt the same connection to the land as before, but now it was enriched by the memory of Ayanna. One afternoon, he walked along the riverbank near his cabin, thinking of her. He imagined her with her family, safe and strong, carrying the lessons of the cabin with her. Samuel realized that their time together had changed him profoundly. He had learned that solitude was not weakness, and connection was not danger, it was a strength. He returned to the cabin and sat by the fire, reflecting on their shared days. The warmth of the flames reminded him of Ayanna's presence, of her quiet strength, and of the bond that had formed between them. Though she was gone, the lessons remained: trust, patience, courage, and the importance of caring for one another. Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Samuel stepped outside. Breathing in the fresh air of spring, the forest was alive with movement: squirrels darting through the trees, deer grazing near the creek, and birds flying in the distance. He felt a deep gratitude for the life he had, the forest he loved, and the memory of the woman who had touched his world so profoundly. Samuel realized that life was not just about survival, but about the connections we make. However brief or fleeting, he thought of Ayanna often, smiling at the memory of her laughter, her stories, and the quiet way she had carried herself. And though she was gone, her presence lingered in the cabin, the forest, and his heart. Samuel knew that he would never be alone again in the way he had once been. The forest was full of life, and the memory of trust, kindness, and shared courage had planted roots in him as deeply as any tree. Spring turned to summer, and Samuel continued his routines, but now with a renewed sense of purpose. He walked the forest with a lighter step, fed the animals, and tended the cabin, all the while remembering the lessons Ayanna had taught him. He found joy in the simple things: the pattern of sunlight on the creek, the songs of birds at dawn, the quiet of a snowfall. One evening, as he sat on the porch, he looked toward the horizon, imagining her journey and hoping she was safe. He whispered a small thanks to the forest, to life, and to her. For the gift of trust and friendship, the world beyond the cabin remained uncertain, as it always had been. But Samuel felt ready to face it. The bond he had shared with Ayanna had changed him, teaching him that connection and kindness could exist even in the harshest of circumstances. In the end, the cabin was not just a place of shelter, it was a home. Not only for Samuel, but for the memory of their shared days, the lessons learned, and the quiet love that had blossomed in the heart of the forest. And as long as he lived there, tending to the land, the animals, and the memory of Ayanna, he would carry the warmth of that winter with him forever.